Just one more time. One more time with feet.
Well, as you may have heard, I invited the Democratic leader and Senator Leahy over to my office this morning, along with Senator Shelby. We had a discussion about a proposal that we offered that I thought was reasonable to both sides to give us an opportunity to, in effect, thread the needle on the border security issue. I've heard back from Senator Schumer that the offer was not acceptable. And so now I'm in consultation with the White House about the way forward, and we'll have more to say about that hopefully a little bit later about what the President is willing to sign. I might say the administration is extremely flexible on this issue, and we're obviously consulted before I sat down with Senator Schumer and Senator Leahy. Secondly, we're on criminal justice. We anticipate finishing that tomorrow. We just had another rather spirited discussion in our lunch about that issue, reminiscent of spirited discussions we've had about it over the last 6 years. But we're now in the final stages of getting to passage on criminal justice.
What's different about the criminal justice reform debate we are having is that we've had a number of successful state-based experiments, including in Texas, with prison reform, which recognizes the reality that people in prison will eventually get out of prison. And if you take low-risk offenders into account and give them access to recidivism-based programming to deal with their drug or alcohol addiction or their education deficit or their skill deficit, that many more of them will leave prison and not be rearrested and returned back to prison in the turnstile of our criminal justice system. That saves money, it saves lives, it reduces the crime rate, and reduces the incarceration rate. That's one of the things that I think people find the most interesting, is this is not just a measure of compassion toward the prisoner. This is basically a public safety measure that will actually make it less likely that people will leave prison and commit additional crimes and hurt public safety, while at the same time saving money and giving people an opportunity for a second chance.
Well, as the leader pointed out, one of the things we need to do to wrap up this Congress and this year is to fund the government, and part of funding the government means providing funding for border security. And if you look at historically, the Democrats in the past, in 2006, the Democrat leader and the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee had voted for a border wall. As recently as 2013, every Senate Democrat voted for 700 miles of wall funding in a bill that included $46 billion for border security, $8 billion specifically for the wall. And I think we all agree that there are lots of people, hardworking, lawful people in this country who come here, who play by the rules, the kind of thing we want to encourage. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to attend a citizenship ceremony in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where 99 people from 33 different countries in the world became American citizens. But they did it the right way. They played by the rules, they followed the laws, the kind of thing we want to encourage. The thing we want to discourage is people coming here illegally. And key to that, obviously, is the issue of a strong border and border security. And so I hope that the Democrats will come around the position that they have held historically. This ought to be an issue that enjoys bipartisan support. There's no reason why Democrats here in the Senate shouldn't be supportive of making sure that we have a strong border that encourages people to come here legally and discourages people to come here illegally.
This past weekend, there was a ruling in Texas about the Affordable Care Act, and the whole thing ruled unconstitutional. As a doctor, people say to me, what does this mean to me personally? And for most people right now, it doesn't mean anything until the courts continue to work this way through the system. But for us in Congress, what it means is that we still have an opportunity to deal with the #1 concern of the whole Obamacare law, which is the cost of care. That is the concern of the majority of the American people when it comes to their health care, is the cost of that care. And I'm going to continue to work for ways to allow people to have the freedom and the flexibility to buy insurance that is affordable for them and appropriate for them and their families. We have done this with the association health plans that allow people to come and work together, and it looks like there's going to be about 4 million people who are going to be able to sign up for those plans. Much more affordable care for them. There are the so-called short-term plans, which actually can be going up to 3 years. Again, much more affordable. For some of these association health plans or short-term plans, the costs can be less than half of what care is under Obamacare in terms of the insurance. Right now, we have a number of the Democrats who seem to be running for president, who have a position which is to get as far away from Obamacare as they can, as they try to go with a single-payer, government-run health care system, and which brings with it the higher taxes and the fewer choices and the longer lines that go with government-run health care programs, as we see in England and in Canada. But I'm willing to work and want to work with more reasonably minded Democrats on working to make sure people can get the care that they need from a doctor that they choose at lower costs.
Well, we're wrapping up what has really been a very productive Congress. The first major rewrite of the tax bill, of the tax law in 31 years, real regulatory reform, an FAA bill that moves into the future, big moves forward on opioids and how to deal with that crisis, as well as healthcare research. A lot to talk about. We come to this end of this end of the year now, having to figure out how to fund the remainder of the government. The very worst thing to do when you're talking about funding the government is a government shutdown. The next worst thing to do is a long-term CR, where you just say, well, we can't decide what to do this year, so we're going to do what we did last year. We could very well see another kind of a CR here. I'd rather not have that, but what I really don't want to do is lose all the work in both the House and the Senate of getting these bills to the floor, having them largely debated in ways they haven't been before, and hopefully whatever happens in the next few days, we build on the work that we've done as we look toward a year that we need to get funded as quickly as we can, and then we need to get started on that work for the next year.
Leader McConnell?
Yeah.
What happened with the proposal last night that there had been chatter that we were attempting to put a bill together, 7 bills, and that fell apart at the last minute? And what should we read into that?
Well, there are a lot of different things that have been discussed. Where we are at the moment is, as I said earlier, I think that Senator Shelby and I made what was a reasonable offer that both sides should have been able to accept to solve the border security issue and still pass the remaining 7 bills. I believe that incoming Speaker Pelosi has little latitude to make a deal. And that may be Senator Schumer's view as well. You can ask him. But my impression is that the incoming Speaker feels she doesn't have the latitude to settle this. Now, I must say, if I were in her shoes, I would rather not be dealing with this year's business next year. I would assume her preference would be to roll out the new Democratic agenda by the fresh new Democratic Congress in the early stages. But I think this prevents that. If we end up going with a relatively short-term CR, we will end up, in effect, punting this year's business into next year. I think it's not a very desirable outcome. From anybody's point of view, I would think it'd be the least desirable outcome for the incoming Speaker's point of view.
Leader McConnell, do you plan on moving a judge's package by the end of this week? Do you think you can get consent from Schumer to do that as part of the deal?
Yeah, as is customary at the end of a session or before recess, the Democratic leader and I will be talking about nominations. We have a lot of them stacked up, And we'll be talking about trying to put together some kind of package on both executive branch nominations and judicial nominations. Nancy?
Convince the president that a shutdown might not be in his interest?
I'm sorry?
How did you convince the president that a shutdown actually isn't
Well,
in
he
his best
can
interest?
speak for himself, but I think a government shutdown is not a good option. That's my view. The American people don't like it. I don't know how many times you remember my favorite country saying, there's no education the second kick of a mule. We've been down this path before, and I don't believe we'll go down this path again.
The White House says that
You and Senator Blood both alluded to this, but just to put a finer point on it, if Democrats have rejected your offer, when you look at the landscape, is a short-term CR really kind of the only option out there right now?
Well, I'm discussing with the White House where we go next, and once I get an answer to that, excuse me. Once I get an answer to that, I'll talk with Senator Schumer again and see what we can do. I think there's certainly bipartisan support for avoiding a government shutdown. And so we're now trying to figure out the way forward, and I'll get back to you when I know. Yeah.
to put a finer point on that, are you convinced that we will not shut down over Christmas?
Yeah.
Leader McConnell, the White House says that the ball is in your court, that they want to see what the Senate can pass,
Well,
and then the president will decide whether or not he can sign it. Do you need to know first what the president's willing to
Look,
accept?
we're in discussion. As I said, we're in discussion with the White House about the way forward. Okay, thanks a lot.